The sound of galloping hooves in the distance made Ruby O'Malley's heart pound against her ribs as she crawled deeper under the sagging wooden porch, splinters digging into her palms and the taste of dust thick on her tongue. Dodge City, Kansas, in the summer of 1875 was unforgiving to everyone, but especially to women who dared to flee their husbands. Ruby pressed herself against the dry earth, her calico dress torn at the hem and stained with the evidence of her desperate escape. Her left eye was swollen nearly shut, and she could still taste blood from her split lip. Married just 6 months to Vernon O'Malley, she had discovered too late the monster behind his charming smile and promises of a comfortable life. The footsteps above her made the wooden slats creak. She held her breath, praying that the shadow moving across the gaps wouldn't notice her. The saloon's porch offered little protection, but it was the only hiding place she'd found when she spotted Vernon's horse tied up outside the general store across the street. "Ruby," Vernon's voice boomed. "I know you're around here somewhere. You can't hide from me, you ungrateful woman." His boots stomped on the boards above her, sending dust raining down on her face. Ruby bit her lip to keep from coughing, the metallic taste of blood filling her mouth again as she reopened the wound. "When I find you," Vernon continued, his words slurring slightly from the whiskey he'd undoubtedly been drinking since dawn, "you'll wish you never thought of running. A wife belongs with her husband. You made vows, remember?" The vows she remembered. The promises of protection and care that had turned to threats and violence within weeks of the ceremony. Vernon O'Malley, the banker's son with connections throughout the county, had shown his true nature the first time she'd burned his dinner. The bruises had only gotten worse from there. "Mr. O'Malley," a new voice called from the street, "your father's looking for you at the bank, says it's urgent business," Vernon cursed. "Tell him I'll be there directly, just need to find my wife first. Delicate thing wandered off while I was seeing to business. Haven't seen Mrs. O'Malley today, sir." Ruby heard Vernon's heavy footsteps move to the edge of the porch. "Well, if you do, tell her to get home where she belongs. Woman's got responsibilities she's neglecting." "Yes, sir." The footsteps receded, but Ruby didn't move. Vernon was clever. He might be circling back, waiting for her to think it was safe. She'd fallen for that trick before, emerging from a hiding place only to find him waiting with rage in his eyes and fists ready. Time stretched endlessly as she lay in the dirt, her body aching from the beating she'd received that morning when she'd spilled coffee on his ledger. The sun climbed higher, baking the ground beneath the porch and turning her hiding place into an oven. Sweat trickled down her face, stinging her cuts. She must have dozed off despite the heat and discomfort because the next thing she knew, voices were approaching unfamiliar ones. "Best price you'll get for those horses, Blake. Stanton's offering $10 less per head." "Still don't sit right with me. Man's got shifty eyes." "All horse traders have shifty eyes. Nature of the business." The voices belonged to 2 men who stopped at the hitching post in front of the saloon. Ruby could see their boots, dusty, well-worn leather that had seen many miles of trail. "Need a drink before we head back to the ranch?" one of the men asked. Wouldn't say no. Throats drier than a preacher's sermon on Sunday. The boots moved toward the steps and Ruby held her breath again. She couldn't be discovered not by strangers who might turn her over to Vernon for a reward or, worse, take advantage of a battered woman with no protection. One set of boots stopped suddenly at the edge of the porch. "Hold up, Mitch." "What is it, Blake?" "Something under there." Ruby's heart hammered so loudly she was certain they could hear it. She tried to make herself smaller, pressing against the building's foundation. A man crouched down, and suddenly a face appeared in the gap between the porch slats and the ground, a face weathered by sun and wind, with piercing blue eyes under the brim of a battered hat. A thick mustache couldn't hide the frown that formed when those eyes locked with hers. "Madam." The man called softly. "You all right under there?" Ruby couldn't speak, her throat closed with fear. "Mitch," the man called to his companion, "there's a lady under the porch." "A what?" "A lady, and she looks hurt bad." The second man crouched down to look. "Lord Almighty." "What happened to you, miss?" Ruby still couldn't find her voice. All she could think was that Vernon might return any moment. The first man, Blake, stretched his arm toward her. "Madam, you can't stay under there, let me help you out." She shook her head frantically. "We won't hurt you," he assured her, his voice gentle despite its depth. "But you need help, you're bleeding." Ruby touched her lip, realizing the wound had opened again. "He'll kill me if he finds me," she finally whispered, understanding dawned in Blake's eyes. "Your husband did this." She nodded once, the movement sending pain shooting through her bruised face. "Mitch, keep watch," Blake instructed. "Make sure nobody's coming." Then he focused on Ruby again. "Madam, I'm Blake Vance. My friend there is Mitch Cooper. We work the R ranch outside of town. We're going to help you, but you need to come out from under there." "He'll come back," Ruby whispered. "Vernon always comes back." "Vernon O'Malley?" Blake asked, his expression hardening. Ruby nodded again, surprised. "You know him?" "Know of him. His reputation spread further than he probably realizes." Blake reached his hand out again. "Please, trust me, we won't let him hurt you again." Something in his steady gaze made Ruby believe him, or perhaps she was simply too exhausted and in too much pain to resist any longer. Slowly, she crawled toward his outstretched hand. The moment her fingers touched his, Blake's grip was firm but gentle. He helped her navigate through the narrow space until she emerged into the blinding sunlight, blinking away tears that formed from both the brightness and relief. Blake helped her to her feet, supporting her when her legs trembled beneath her. Now that she could see him fully, she realized he was tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair visible beneath his hat. His clothing was typical of a working cowboy, practical, dusty, and worn in all the right places. "Sweet Jesus," Mitch muttered, taking in her appearance. He was shorter than Blake, with reddish hair and freckles across his nose that made him look younger than he probably was. Ruby knew she must look terrible. Her dress was filthy, her face bruised and swollen, and her normally neat auburn hair had fallen from its pins and hung limply around her shoulders. "We need to get you somewhere safe," Blake said. "Doc Miller's office isn't far." "No," Ruby said, panic rising. "Vernon knows everyone in town." "He'll find me there." Blake nodded, understanding. "Then we'll take you to the ranch. My boss, Mrs. Richardson, she'll help you." "Blake," Mitch warned, "O'Malley's coming back this way." Ruby instinctively tried to pull away to find another hiding place, but Blake's hand on her arm was firm. "Get the horses," he told Mitch. Then to Ruby, "Stay behind me." Vernon O'Malley came around the corner of the saloon, his expensive suit marking him as different from the cowboys and laborers who populated most of Dodge City. His handsome face was flushed with drink and anger, and when he spotted Ruby standing with Blake, that anger crystallized into pure rage. "There you are, you worthless woman," he shouted, stalking toward them. "Do you have any idea what trouble you've caused? Get over here now." Ruby shrank back, but Blake stepped forward, placing himself between her and Vernon. "The lady's not going anywhere with you, O'Malley," Blake said, his voice calm but carrying a dangerous edge. Vernon stopped, seeming to truly notice Blake for the first time. "This is none of your business, cowboy. That's my wife, and she's coming home with me." "Not today, she's not," Blake replied. "Not ever again," from the looks of her face. Vernon's expression twisted with fury. "You're interfering with my property, Vance. Step aside before you regret it." "She's not property," Blake said. "She's a person who deserves better than what you've been giving her." Vernon's hand moved toward the inside of his jacket, where Ruby knew he kept a small pistol. "I'm warning you." Before he could finish the sentence, Blake's hand flashed to his own holster, drawing his revolver with a speed that stunned Ruby. He didn't point it at Vernon, but held it casually at his side, a clear warning. "Don't make this worse than it already is," Blake said. "Walk away, O'Malley. Cool your head." Vernon's eyes darted between Blake's gun, his face, and Ruby cowering behind him. For a moment, she thought he might actually draw his weapon, but then Mitch returned with their horses, and Vernon seemed to reconsider the odds. "This isn't over," Vernon spat. "She's my wife. The law's on my side." "The law doesn't give you the right to beat a woman half to death," Blake countered. "Now go on, before this gets ugly." Vernon's face contorted with rage, but he was smart enough to recognize when he was outmatched. With a final venomous glare at Ruby, he turned and stalked away, shouting over his shoulder, "You'll regret this, Ruby. Both of you will." Only when Vernon disappeared around the corner did Blake holster his weapon. He turned to Ruby, concern evident in his eyes. "Can you ride?" Ruby nodded. She'd grown up riding on her father's small farm before he died and left her with few options beyond marriage. "Yes, but I don't have a horse." "You can ride with me," Blake said. "Mitch, let's get out of here before he comes back with reinforcements." Within moments, Blake had lifted Ruby onto his horse before swinging up behind her. As they rode out of town, Ruby felt a strange mix of terror and relief. She was leaving behind everything she knew, fleeing with strangers into an uncertain future. But for the first time in months, she wasn't afraid of a fist striking her face or a boot connecting with her ribs. She leaned slightly against Blake's solid chest, unable to hold herself upright any longer. Exhaustion and pain overwhelmed her as the adrenaline that had kept her going began to fade. "Rest if you can, Mrs. O'Malley," Blake said softly near her ear. "You're safe now, I promise." As the horse carried them away from Dodge City, Ruby allowed her eyes to close, hoping that for once, a man's promise might actually be kept. The Triple R Ranch sprawled across the rolling Kansas prairie, a collection of well-maintained buildings surrounding a large two-story ranch house. As they approached after nearly 2 hours of riding, Ruby saw cattle grazing in the distance and cowboys moving among them. Mrs. Richardson inherited this place when her husband died 5 years back, Blake explained as they rode through the gate. Most folks thought she'd sell it, being a woman alone, but she proved them all wrong. Triple Artiques, one of the most successful operations in the territory now. Ruby had heard whispers about the widow Richardson, a formidable woman who defied convention and ran her ranch with an iron will. She'd never imagined she might meet her, let alone seek her protection. Blake helped Ruby down from the horse, steadying her when her legs threatened to give way beneath her. The long ride had stiffened her already sore body, and every movement sent pain shooting through her bruised ribs. An older woman emerged from the main house, wiping her hands on her apron. Her gray-streaked hair was pulled back in a no-nonsense bun, and her sharp eyes took in the situation immediately. "What's this, then?" she asked, approaching them with quick steps. "Mrs. Peterson," Blake greeted her. "This is Mrs. Ruby O'Malley. She needs help and a safe place to stay." The housekeeper's eyes softened as she took in Ruby's battered face. "Vernon O'Malley's work, I'd wager. That man's temper is well known, even out here." She gestured toward the house. "Bring her inside. Mrs. Richardson is in town today, but she'll be back by supper time." Blake kept his hand at Ruby's elbow as they followed Mrs. Peterson into the cool interior of the ranch house. Ruby felt self-conscious about her dirty dress and disheveled appearance in such a well-kept home, but the housekeeper didn't seem to notice or care. "Sit her here, Mrs. Peterson directed, indicating a chair in the kitchen. "I'll fetch some water and clean cloths." Ruby sank gratefully into the chair, wincing as her body protested. Blake hovered nearby, his hat in his hands, looking uncertain now that they'd reached safety. "Thank you," Ruby said quietly, meeting his eyes. "I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't come along." Blake's expression darkened. "I have a pretty good idea, and it doesn't bear thinking about." He set his hat on the table. "I should see to my horse, but I'll be back to check on you." "You're safe here, Mrs. O'Malley. The Triple R looks after its own. I'm not one of yours," Ruby pointed out. Blake's mouth quirked in a half-smile that transformed his serious face. "You are now," after he left, Mrs. Peterson returned with a basin of water, clean cloths, and a bottle of witch hazel. With gentle hands, she cleaned Ruby's cuts and dabbed at the bruises, clicking her tongue in disapproval at each new injury she discovered. "That man should be horsewhipped," she muttered. "Treating a woman like this, it's not Christian and it's not decent." Ruby remained silent. She'd heard similar sentiments from the minister's wife in Dodge City, who had nevertheless advised her to pray harder and be a more obedient wife to avoid Vernon's wrath. Mrs. Peterson helped her wash and provided a clean dress that was slightly too large but blessedly free of dirt and tears. She fed Ruby a bowl of stew and fresh bread that tasted better than anything Ruby could remember eating in months, though her split lip made eating painful. Afterward, she was shown to a small but comfortable bedroom on the second floor. "You rest now," Mrs. Peterson instructed. Mrs. Richardson will want to speak with you when she returns, but that won't be for several hours yet. Ruby sank onto the bed, overwhelmed by the kindness of strangers after months of cruelty from the man who had vowed to cherish her. "Why are you helping me?" she asked softly. "You don't know me." Mrs. Peterson paused at the door. "I knew another woman once." She stayed with her husband, thinking she had no choice. They found her dead one morning. Nobody did anything because a man has rights over his wife, they said. Her face hardened with the memory. Mrs. Richardson doesn't hold with such notions, neither do I, neither does Blake Vance, it seems. With that, she left Ruby alone. Despite the unfamiliar surroundings and the uncertainty of her future, Ruby felt safer than she had in months. She lay back on the clean sheets, and for the first time since her wedding day, she slept without fear. The sound of voices woke her sometime later. The room was dim with evening shadows, and for a disorienting moment, Ruby forgot where she was. The panic that surged through her subsided as she remembered the cowboy, the ranch, safety. She rose carefully from the bed, her body protesting every movement. At the bedroom door, she paused to listen to the voices drifting up from below. "Couldn't just leave her there," Blake was saying. "O'Malley would have killed her or near enough." "I'm not questioning your actions, Blake," a woman's voice responded, firm, authoritative, but not unkind. "I'm questioning what comes next. Vernon O'Malley isn't a man to let go of what he considers his. He'll come looking for her." "Let him try," Blake replied, a dangerous edge to his voice, "and start a war. We have enough troubles without adding that to the list." Ruby moved to the top of the stairs, drawn by the conversation about her fate. A woman stood in the entryway below, tall, straight-backed, with steel-gray hair and the bearing of someone accustomed to command. Mrs. Richardson, Ruby presumed. Blake stood facing her, his expression determined. "She needs our help," Blake insisted. "You didn't see her face, Mrs. Richardson. The man's a monster." Mrs. Richardson sighed. "I'm not saying we shouldn't help her, Blake. I'm just saying we need to be smart about it." She glanced up and spotted Ruby on the stairs. "Ah, Mrs. O'Malley." "Please join us." Ruby descended carefully, conscious of her bruised appearance and borrowed dress. "I'm sorry to cause trouble," she said. "I can leave in the morning if—" "Nonsense," Mrs. Richardson interrupted. "You'll do no such thing. I'm Elizabeth Richardson. Welcome to the Triple R." "Thank you for your hospitality, Mrs. Richardson. Call me Elizabeth. We don't stand on ceremony here." She gestured toward the parlor. "Shall we sit? Mrs. Peterson says you haven't eaten since noon." In the well-appointed parlor, Ruby perched nervously on the edge of a chair while Elizabeth settled across from her. Blake remained standing, his tall frame seeming too large for the feminine space. "Blake has told me some of what happened today," Elizabeth said. "But I'd like to hear your story if you're willing to share it." Ruby hesitated, unaccustomed to anyone actually wanting to hear her side of things. Vernon had always dismissed her words, telling her she was exaggerating or outright lying when she tried to explain her injuries to concerned neighbors or the doctor. "It's all right," Elizabeth assured her. "Take your time." So Ruby began to speak. She told them about meeting Vernon O'Malley when he came to collect on a loan her father had taken before his death. How Vernon had offered marriage as a solution to her financial troubles, promising to care for her and protect her. How the first blow had come just 3 weeks after the wedding, when she'd expressed an opinion that contradicted his own at a dinner party. "He apologized afterward," Ruby said, her voice hollow. "Brought me flowers, said it would never happen again." She gave a bitter laugh that pulled at her split lip. "But it did happen again and again, until it wasn't even about anything I'd done wrong, just his temper, his frustration with work, his drinking." She told them about her attempts to seek help from the minister, from the town doctor, from the sheriff. How each man had sympathized but ultimately sent her back to her husband with advice to be more accommodating, less provoking. How Vernon's position as the banker's son protected him from any real consequences. "This morning, he was angry about a business deal that fell through," she finished. "I spilled coffee on his ledger when he startled me by shouting. He was worse than usual. When he left for work, I packed a small bag and ran. I was trying to reach the stage coach office when I saw him in town and had to hide." By the time she finished her story, Elizabeth's face had hardened into granite, and Blake's hands were clenched into fists at his sides. "You'll stay here," Elizabeth declared, "for as long as you need." "But my husband is no longer your concern," Elizabeth interrupted. "The law may say a husband owns his wife, but I've never had much respect for laws written by men who have never known what it is to fear the very person who should protect you." Ruby blinked back tears. "He'll come looking for me." "Let him," Elizabeth said with a shrug. The Triple R has been standing against threats far more dangerous than one banker's son with an inflated sense of entitlement. "I can't ask you to put yourselves at risk for me," Ruby protested. "You didn't ask," Blake pointed out. "We offered," Elizabeth nodded. "Blake's right. Now I suggest you eat something and get more rest. Tomorrow we can discuss what you want to do next." That night, as Ruby lay in the unfamiliar bed, she found herself thinking of Blake Vance's steady presence, the way he had placed himself between her and danger without hesitation. It had been so long since a man had shown her anything but cruelty or indifference that she scarcely knew how to interpret his kindness. One thing was certain: Vernon would indeed come looking for her. And when he did, she feared that the safety she had found might prove as fragile as all her previous hopes. The next morning, Ruby woke to sunlight streaming through unfamiliar curtains and the distant sounds of a working ranch. For a moment, disorientation gripped her, then memory rushed back. The beating, her escape, the cowboy who had saved her from beneath the saloon's porch. She rose carefully, her body still aching but less desperately than the day before. Someone had left a basin of fresh water on the dresser, along with a bar of lavender-scented soap. After washing, she put on the borrowed dress again, wishing she had her bag with her few personal possessions. She dropped it during her panicked flight when she'd spotted Vernon in town. When she made her way downstairs, she found Mrs. Peterson in the kitchen, kneading bread dough with strong, flour-dusted hands. "Good morning, Mrs. O'Malley," the housekeeper greeted her. "Sit yourself down. Breakfast is keeping warm in the oven." A plate of eggs, bacon, and biscuits was soon placed before her, along with a cup of strong coffee. Ruby ate gratefully, realizing how long it had been since she'd enjoyed a meal without fear of criticism or violence interrupting it. "Where is everyone?" she asked when she'd finished. "Mrs. Richardson rode out early to check on the herd moving to the north pasture," Mrs. Peterson replied. "Blake's been in and out since dawn. That man rarely sits still unless he's forced to." She wiped her hands on her apron. "He brought something for you, by the way. It's on the bench by the door." Ruby went to look and found her small carpet bag, the one she'd abandoned in her flight. She opened it with trembling hands to find her spare dress, nightgown, hairbrush, and the small silver locket that had belonged to her mother. It was the only thing of value she'd managed to hide from Vernon when he'd sold most of her possessions to pay for his gambling debts. How did he find it? She wondered aloud. "Blake knows Dodge City like the back of his hand," Mrs. Peterson said, "and he's got a knack for finding things: strays, lost cattle, misplaced tools. It's a gift." Ruby clutched the bag to her chest, overwhelmed by this unexpected kindness. "I don't know how to thank him." "No need for thanks. Blake does what's right because it's right, not for gratitude." Later that morning, Ruby sat on the wide front porch, enjoying the breeze and the distant view of cattle grazing on the rolling hills. Her face was still discolored with bruises, but the swelling had gone down enough that she could see properly from both eyes. A rider approached from the direction of the bunkhouse Blake, his tall figure unmistakable even at a distance. He dismounted at the bottom of the porch steps, removing his hat as he climbed them. "Morning, Mrs. O'Malley," he greeted her. "You're looking better today." "Ruby, please," she said, "and thank you for everything, including retrieving my bag." Blake shrugged as if it were nothing. "Figured you might want your things." He hesitated, then added, "I have some news from town." Ruby's stomach clenched. "Vernon, he's been asking questions, offering rewards for information about where you've gone." Blake's expression was grim. "He's telling folks you're unwell, that your mind is unstable, and you need medical attention." The familiar tactic didn't surprise Ruby. Vernon had used similar excuses before when neighbors questioned her injuries. He's trying to make me sound crazy so no one will believe me if I speak about what he's done. That seems to be his plan, Blake agreed, settling his large frame onto a chair near hers. But folks around here know the triple R, they know Mrs. Richardson wouldn't shelter someone who was truly dangerous or unstable. But they also know Vernon has money and influence, Ruby pointed out. And a wife is a husband's property under the law. Even if people believe me, they might not be willing to cross him. Blake's jaw tightened. Some laws don't deserve respect. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of her situation hanging between them. Ruby studied Blake's profile as he gazed out at the land. There was something reassuring about his presence, a steadiness that made her feel secure despite the uncertainty of her future. Mrs. Richardson Elizabeth said I could stay as long as I need to, Ruby said finally, but I can't hide here forever. Eventually, I'll need to make a new life somewhere. You thinking of leaving Kansas? Blake asked, turning to look at her. I don't know, I don't have family elsewhere. My parents are both gone and I was an only child. She twisted her hands in her lap. But I can work, I can cook and sew and keep house. I managed my father's accounts before he died. I could find employment somewhere far from here. Blake frowned. There's no rush to decide. You're safe here for now. For now, Ruby echoed, but Vernon won't give up easily. He sees me as his possession and he hates to lose anything he considers his. Then he'll have to learn a difficult lesson, Blake said with quiet determination, because you're not going back to him, not while I have breath in my body. The vehemence in his voice startled her. You barely know me. I know enough, he replied simply. I know what I saw in Dodge City, a brave woman who fled a monster even knowing the odds were stacked against her. I respect courage, Ruby, and I despise bullies. Before she could respond, the sound of approaching horses drew their attention. Elizabeth Richardson rode at the head of a small group of cowboys, her straight back and confident seat making her gender irrelevant to her authority. Elizabeth dismounted with the ease of someone who had spent a lifetime on horseback and climbed the porch steps. Good morning, Ruby. I see you're feeling well enough to enjoy the air. Yes, thank you. Your hospitality has been overwhelming. Elizabeth waved away the thanks. Blake, I need you to ride to the south boundary. Tim Horner claims our cattle have been breaking through the fence line and trampling his corn. Take Mitch and see what the situation is. Blake stood, settling his hat back on his head. Yes, madam, he nodded to Ruby. Rest well, Mrs. O'Malley. As he strode away, Elizabeth took the chair he had vacated. Blake told you about your husband's activities in town, I presume, Ruby nodded. He's trying to make me sound unstable. A common tactic, Elizabeth agreed. My late husband tried something similar when I disagreed with him in public once, told everyone I was having female troubles that affected my thinking. Her smile was sharp as a blade. I never forgave him for that, even after he apologized. Ruby was surprised by the admission. But you stayed with him. It was a different situation, Elizabeth said. Harold never raised a hand to me, and after that incident, he learned to treat me with more respect. But I understand what it is to have a man try to undermine your credibility. She regarded Ruby thoughtfully. What do you want, Ruby? Not what you think is possible or practical. What do you truly want for your future? The question caught Ruby off guard. For so long, her only goal had been survival, getting through each day without provoking Vernon's temper. I want freedom, she said finally. I want to make my own decisions without fear. She hesitated, then admitted, I want to feel safe enough to sleep through the night without waking at every sound. Elizabeth nodded, understanding in her eyes. Those are reasonable desires. As for practical matters, I could use help with the accounts. Mrs. Peterson mentioned you handled your father's books. You're offering me employment, Ruby asked, startled. I'm offering you options, Elizabeth corrected. Stay, work, earn your keep if it makes you feel better about accepting help, or don't rest, he'll decide what comes next. The choice is yours. The concept of choice was so foreign that Ruby felt tears prick her eyes. Thank you, she whispered. I would like to be useful. Then it settled. When you're feeling stronger, we'll set you up in the office. Elizabeth rose. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to change before the dust from the trail becomes a permanent part of my clothing. As Elizabeth disappeared into the house, Ruby remained on the porch, watching the activities of the ranch unfold before her. Cowboys moved about their tasks, horses were groomed in the corral, and a wagon returned from town laden with supplies. For the first time in longer than she could remember, Ruby felt a flicker of hope. It was fragile, uncertain, but it was there a tiny flame she would protect with everything she had. 2 weeks passed with surprising swiftness. Ruby's bruises faded from angry purple to sickly yellow-green before disappearing altogether. Her split lip healed, leaving only a small, barely noticeable scar at the corner of her mouth. As her body healed, she found herself sleeping more soundly each night, though she still startled at unexpected noises. True to her word, Elizabeth had set Ruby up in the small office off the main parlor, where she now spent several hours each day reviewing the ranch's account books. The work was soothing in its familiarity columns of numbers that either balanced or didn't, with no room for the kind of subjective judgment that had so often led to Vernon's unpredictable rages. Ruby quickly discovered that while the Triple R was indeed profitable, Elizabeth's bookkeeping methods were haphazard at best. With quiet efficiency, Ruby began reorganizing the accounts, creating a system that would make it easier to track expenses and income by category. Elizabeth had been impressed. "In 1 week, you've made more sense of these books than I managed in 5 years, she declared. "Harold would have appreciated your methods. He was always after me to be more organized." Ruby had also begun helping Mrs. Peterson with household tasks not because it was expected, but because the routine of cooking and cleaning helped her feel more settled. The housekeeper had initially protested, insisting Ruby was a guest, but had eventually accepted the assistance with good grace. And then there was Blake. He came and went with the rhythm of ranch work, sometimes absent for days when duties took him to the far reaches of Triple R land. But he made a point of checking on Ruby whenever he returned, bringing small gifts, a book from town, a wildflower he'd picked, a piece of ribbon he thought might match her dress. Each gesture touched her deeply, not because of the items themselves, but because of the thoughtfulness they represented. Vernon's gifts had always been expensive but impersonal, designed to impress others more than please her. Blake's offerings showed that he paid attention to her preferences and thought of her even when they were apart. On this particular afternoon, Ruby sat at the desk in the office, frowning over a discrepancy in the cattle sale records when a shadow fell across her work. She looked up to find Blake leaning against the doorframe, hat in hand and a smudge of dirt across his cheek. "Didn't mean to startle you," he said when she jumped slightly. "Just got back from the north pasture. Thought I'd see how you're faring." Ruby smiled, setting down her pencil. "I'm well, thank you. Just trying to make sense of these figures from last month's cattle auction." "Either Elizabeth's memory of the sale is wrong, or someone made an error in the recording." Blake nodded. "Probably the latter. Mrs. Richardson has a head for numbers that puts most men to shame. She just doesn't have the patience for the recording part." "I've noticed," Ruby said with a small laugh. It still felt strange to laugh a rusty, almost forgotten sensation. Blake's eyes warmed at the sound. "It's good to hear you laugh," he said, as if reading her thoughts. "You should do it more often." A blush crept up Ruby's cheeks. "I'm trying to remember how." His expression softened. "You're doing just fine, Ruby, better than fine." He hesitated, then added, "I'm heading into town tomorrow. Is there anything you need?" The mention of town sent a chill through her. "Has there been any news of Vernon?" Blake's face darkened. "He's still asking questions, still claiming you're unwell and need to be returned to his care, but nobody who matters is listening to him." "He won't give up," Ruby said quietly. "I know him too well to believe that." "Then he'll be disappointed," Blake replied firmly, "because neither will we." The conviction in his voice warmed her. Over the past 2 weeks, Blake had become her most steadfast supporter, not just protecting her physically, but bolstering her spirits when doubts crept in during the dark hours of night. "There is one thing," Ruby said hesitantly. "If you happen to pass the mercantile, I could use some thread. Blue, if they have it. Blue thread," Blake repeated with a nod. "Consider it done." He lingered in the doorway a moment longer, as if wanting to say something more, Finally, he settled for supper at the usual time. Ruby nodded. Mrs. Peterson is making beef stew, and I'm baking apple pie for dessert. Then I'll make sure to save room, he said with a smile that made something flutter in her chest, a sensation she had thought Vernon had beaten out of her permanently. After Blake left, Ruby found it hard to concentrate on the account books. Her mind kept drifting to his kind eyes, his gentle manner, the way he treated her with respect rather than as a possession. She reminded herself sternly that she was still technically a married woman, and even if she weren't, a man like Blake Vance, handsome, honorable, capable, could have his pick of unmarried women who didn't carry the kind of baggage she did. Still, it was hard not to feel a warmth in his presence that had nothing to do with the summer heat and everything to do with the way he looked at her, as if she were something precious rather than something to be owned. That evening, as they gathered around the dining table, Elizabeth, Mrs. Peterson, Blake, Mitch, and Ruby, the conversation flowed easily. These meals had become a highlight of Ruby's days, so different from the tense, silent dinners with Vernon where every word had to be carefully considered lest it trigger his temper. The new fence on the south boundary is holding, Blake was telling Elizabeth. Horner won't have any more complaints about our cattle on his land. Good, Elizabeth said. That man has been looking for reasons to cause trouble since Harold turned down his offer to buy the R 10 years ago. Some men can't accept a no even when it's for their own good, Mrs. Peterson observed, with a pointed look at Ruby that suggested she wasn't just talking about land sales. After the meal, when Mrs. Peterson had shooed everyone out of the kitchen despite Ruby's offers to help with the dishes, Ruby found herself walking on the porch with Blake. The evening was mild, with a gentle breeze carrying the scent of grass and distant rain. Storm coming, Blake noted, looking at the horizon where clouds were gathering. Will it affect your trip to town tomorrow? Ruby asked. He shook his head. Should pass through overnight. Roads might be muddy, but nothing Storm can't handle. Storm was his horse, a powerful black gelding with a temperament that belied his name, gentle as a lamb unless threatened. They stood in companionable silence, watching the distant lightning illuminate the clouds. Ruby was acutely aware of Blake beside her, his tall frame close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him, yet he maintained a respectful distance. Thank you, she said suddenly. Blake glanced at her, eyebrow raised. For what? For not treating me like I'm made of glass. Everyone else, even Elizabeth and Mrs. Peterson, they're careful around me. They watch what they say, how they say it. She turned to face him fully. But you've never done that. You're kind, but you don't coddle me. A smile tugged at his mouth. You don't strike me as a woman who needs coddling, Ruby O'Malley. Respect, yes. Support, certainly, but not coddling. Vernon used to say I was too sensitive, she admitted, that I broke too easily. Blake's expression hardened. Vernon O'Malley wouldn't know true strength if it kicked him in the teeth. It takes courage to leave everything you know, especially when the odds are against you. His faith in her made Ruby stand a little straighter. I was terrified, she confessed. I still am sometimes. Being afraid doesn't make you weak, Blake said quietly. It makes you human. Courage isn't the absence of fear, it's moving forward despite it. The rumble of thunder punctuated his words, closer now. Fat raindrops began to fall, spattering the dirt of the yard and sending up little puffs of dust where they landed. We should go in, Ruby said reluctantly, not wanting their conversation to end. Blake nodded, but as they turned toward the door, he caught her hand. The touch was light, respectful, but it sent a jolt through Ruby that had nothing to do with fear. Ruby, he said, his voice low and serious. I want you to know something. Whatever happens with O'Malley, whatever you decide to do next, you've got people on your side now. You're not alone anymore. The sincerity in his eyes made her throat tight with emotion. Thank you, Blake, she whispered. He released her hand as they entered the house, but the warmth of his touch lingered long after they had bid each other good night and retired to their respective rooms. In her bed, listening to the storm rage outside, Ruby found herself thinking not of Vernon and the threat he still posed, but of Blake Vance and the way he made her feel like someone worth protecting, worth knowing, worth caring for. It was a dangerous path for her thoughts to travel, she knew. She was still married in the eyes of the law. Vernon still had rights over her that no decent person would acknowledge but that the courts would uphold. And even if that weren't the case, she had been so damaged by her marriage that she wasn't sure she could ever trust a man fully again. And yet, when Blake looked at her with those steady blue eyes, she found herself wanting to try. The next morning dawned clear and fresh after the storm. Ruby woke early, aware that Blake would be leaving for town soon and wanting to see him before he departed. She dressed quickly in her blue calico, the one she had been wearing when she fled Dodge City, now cleaned and mended, and made her way downstairs. Blake was in the kitchen, accepting a package from Mrs. Peterson. "Bread and cheese for the road," the housekeeper was saying. No sense riding on an empty stomach. He looked up when Ruby entered, and something in his expression made her heart skip. "Good morning," he greeted her. "You're up early." "I wanted to wish you safe travels," Ruby said, "and to add something to your list if it's not too much trouble." "Name it," Blake said immediately. Ruby hesitated. "Paper and envelopes if the mercantile carries them. I'd like to write to my aunt in St. Louis. She's my only living relative and she should know what's happened." Blake nodded. "Of course, anything else?" She shook her head, suddenly shy under his direct gaze. There was something different about him this morning, a determination in his expression that hadn't been there before. "I should be back by nightfall," he told her. "Try not to solve all of Elizabeth's accounting problems while I'm gone." "Leave something for tomorrow." The gentle teasing made her smile. "I'll try to restrain myself." Blake thanked Mrs. Peterson for the provisions, tipped his hat to Ruby, and departed. Through the kitchen window, Ruby watched him mount Storm and ride toward the gate, his straight back and broad shoulders a reassuring sight until he disappeared from view. The day passed slowly. Ruby worked on the accounts until her eyes grew tired, then helped Mrs. Peterson prepare vegetables from the kitchen garden for dinner. Elizabeth was out with the hands, checking on a section of fence that had been damaged in the storm. It was late afternoon when Ruby heard the sound of approaching horses, multiple riders, moving fast. She went to the window, expecting to see Elizabeth returning with some of the cowboys. Instead, she saw Vernon O'Malley at the head of 5 men, all mounted on fine horses, all wearing expressions of grim determination. Terror froze her in place. Vernon had found her. Somehow he had discovered where she was hiding. Mrs. Peterson appeared at her side, taking in the situation with one glance. "Go upstairs," she ordered. "Lock yourself in your room. I'll deal with this." Ruby couldn't move. "He'll hurt you," she whispered. "He'll hurt anyone who stands in his way." "Nonsense," Mrs. Peterson said firmly. "This is Triple R land. He has no authority here." But they both knew that men like Vernon O'Malley made their own authority when it suited them. And he had brought reinforcements, his father's clerks, perhaps, or hired men paid to help retrieve his unstable wife. Ruby forced herself to move, slipping out of the kitchen and up the back stairs as Mrs. Peterson went to the front door. From her bedroom window, Ruby could see the men dismounting in the yard. Vernon's voice carried clearly in the still afternoon air. "I've come for my wife," he announced without preamble. "I know she's here." "Mrs. Richardson isn't receiving visitors today," Mrs. Peterson replied, her voice steady. "Don't play games with me, woman," Vernon snapped. "I'm talking about Ruby, my wife. She ran away 2 weeks ago, and I have reason to believe she's been hiding here." "I don't know what you're talking about, Mr. O'Malley." Vernon's laugh was ugly. "Of course you do. That cowboy of yours, Vance, he took her from Dodge City. Interfered in a private matter between husband and wife." Ruby's heart sank. Someone had seen them leaving town together and had reported back to Vernon. Perhaps he had been offering rewards for information higher than she'd realized. "Mr. Vance is not here," Mrs. Peterson said. "Neither is Mrs. Richardson. I suggest you return to town and come back when the owner is present if you have business to discuss." "My business is my wife," Vernon insisted, "and I'm not leaving without her." There was a commotion below, the sound of boots on the porch steps, Mrs. Peterson protesting, men pushing past her into the house. Ruby's breath came in short gasps as she heard them begin to search the rooms below. She looked around desperately for somewhere to hide, but the bedroom offered few options. The wardrobe was too obvious, the space under the bed too exposed. For a wild moment, she considered climbing out the window and trying to reach the bunkhouse where some of the hands might be resting between shifts, but before she could move, the bedroom door burst open. Vernon stood in the doorway, his handsome face twisted with triumph and rage. "There you are," he said, advancing into the room. "Do you have any idea what trouble you've caused, the embarrassment to my family, the talk in town?" Ruby backed away until she hit the wall. "Stay away from me, Vernon," he sneered. "Is that any way to greet your husband? After I've been searching for you, worried sick about your condition." "My condition," Ruby repeated. "You mean the bruises you gave me, the split lip, the cracked rib that still hasn't fully healed?" Vernon waved a dismissive hand. "Exaggerations. You've always been clumsy, darling." Everyone knows that. The casual denial of his abuse, so familiar, so expected, sparked something in Ruby that overshadowed her fear. "No," she said, her voice stronger than she expected. "Everyone doesn't know that, because it isn't true. I'm not clumsy, Vernon. You're cruel." His face darkened. "Watch your tongue, wife. You're already in enough trouble. I'm not going back with you," Ruby declared. "Not ever." Vernon lunged forward, grabbing her arm with bruising force. "You don't have a choice. You're my wife. The law says you belong to me." "The law is wrong," Ruby spat, struggling against his grip. Vernon raised his other hand and Ruby flinched, anticipating the blow. But before it could fall, a new voice spoke from the doorway, cold, authoritative, and unmistakably feminine. "Take your hands off her, O'Malley." Elizabeth Richardson stood in the doorway, a shotgun held casually but competently in her hands. Behind her stood 3 of the triple Articus cowboys, each with expressions that suggested they'd be happy for Vernon to give them a reason to intervene. Vernon's grip on Ruby's arm loosened slightly, but he didn't release her. "This is a private matter, Mrs. Richardson, between a man and his wife." "Not on my land it isn't," Elizabeth replied evenly. "In case you failed to notice, you're trespassing and assaulting a woman under my protection." "Protection?" Vernon scoffed. "You're harboring a runaway wife. That's hardly legal." "I'm harboring a woman who came to me bruised and bleeding," Elizabeth countered, "which seems a far more serious crime than a wife seeking sanctuary from abuse." Vernon's men had appeared in the hallway behind Elizabeth, but the sight of the armed cowboys gave them pause. The standoff stretched taut as a wire. "Step away from Mrs. O'Malley," Elizabeth instructed, raising the shotgun slightly. "Now." For a moment, Ruby thought Vernon might defy the order, might drag her bodily from the room, counting on his men to overcome Elizabeth and her cowboys. But something in the widow's eyes must have convinced him she was deadly serious, because he released Ruby's arm with a disgusted shove. "This isn't over," he told Ruby. "You're still my wife. No court will support what you're doing." "Perhaps," Elizabeth acknowledged, "but courts are far away and my shotgun is right here. I suggest you leave while you still can." Vernon's face contorted with rage, but he was smart enough to recognize when he was outmatched. With a final venomous glare at Ruby, he stormed past Elizabeth and down the hallway, his men following in his wake. Elizabeth didn't lower the shotgun until they heard the front door slam. "Are you all right?" she asked Ruby. Ruby nodded, though her arm throbbed where Vernon had gripped it. "Thank you, if you hadn't come when you did." "Fortunately, we were already on our way back when one of the hands spotted riders heading this way," Elizabeth explained. "He recognized O'Malley from town and rode ahead to warn us." She handed the shotgun to one of the cowboys. "Make sure they leave the property, Jim, and post extra guards tonight. I wouldn't put it past O'Malley to try something foolish." As the cowboys departed to carry out her orders, Elizabeth turned back to Ruby. "He found you sooner than we expected." "Someone must have seen Blake and me leaving Dodge City," Ruby said, sinking onto the edge of the bed as reaction set in, making her legs weak. "Vernon must have been offering rewards for information." Elizabeth nodded grimly. "Money loosens lips, but he won't try the direct approach again, not after today." "Which means he'll try something else," Ruby concluded. The brief courage that had allowed her to stand up to Vernon was fading, leaving behind cold dread. "He won't give up, Elizabeth, not until he gets what he wants." "Then we'll need to be more clever than he is," Elizabeth replied. "I've dealt with stubborn men before." She paused, studying Ruby's pale face. But that's a conversation for tomorrow. Rest now. I'll have Mrs. Peterson bring up some tea and something for that arm. After Elizabeth left, Ruby moved to the window. In the yard below, Vernon and his men were mounting their horses under the watchful eyes of the R Cowboys. Vernon glanced up at the house before riding away, and even at a distance, Ruby could feel the malice in his gaze. Blake had been right. Vernon wouldn't give up easily. And now that he knew exactly where she was, the danger had increased tenfold, not just for her, but for everyone at the R who had shown her kindness. As she watched the dust cloud of the departing riders, Ruby made a decision. She couldn't stay. As long as she remained at the R, she put Elizabeth, Mrs. Peterson, and especially Blake at risk from Vernon's vengeance. Tonight, after everyone was asleep, she would leave. She would take her few possessions and slip away, perhaps find work in another town under a different name. It would be a lonely, uncertain existence, but better than causing harm to the people who had helped her. With that resolution firming her spine, Ruby turned away from the window. She would make her plans carefully. And when Blake returned from town, she would pretend that nothing had changed, would not let him see her intention to disappear from his life as suddenly as she had entered it. The thought of leaving Blake behind made her heart ache in a way that surprised her with its intensity. In just 2 weeks, he had become more important to her than she wanted to admit. But that was all the more reason to go. She couldn't bear to be the cause of his suffering if Vernon decided to take revenge. Better a clean break, she told herself. Better to vanish like the morning mist, leaving nothing behind but memories. The sunset painted the western sky in shades of gold and crimson as Blake rode back toward the R. He had completed his errands in town efficiently, picking up the thread Ruby had requested, the paper and envelopes, and a few other items he hoped might please her. A small book of poetry he'd found in the mercantile, a length of ribbon that matched her eyes. But the most important item rested in his vest pocket, a letter from Judge Ellsworth, an old friend of Blake's father, outlining the legal options that might be available to Ruby if she chose to pursue them. The judge had been sympathetic but realistic about the challenges of a woman seeking divorce, especially from a man with Vernon O'Malley's connections. Not impossible, the judge had written, but difficult. The lady would need to prove extreme cruelty beyond what most courts consider a husband's right to correct his wife's behavior. Witnesses would be essential, and even then, the outcome would be uncertain. It wasn't the encouraging news Blake had hoped for, but it was honest. And Ruby deserved honesty even when the truth was unpleasant. As he approached the Artiques gate, Blake noticed something unusual: Jim Carson standing guard, rifle in hand. The young cowboy straightened when he recognized Blake. "Evening, Jim," Blake called. "Something wrong?" Jim's expression was grim. "O'Malley showed up this afternoon with a bunch of his cronies, tried to take Mrs. O'Malley by force." Blake's blood ran cold. "Ruby, is she all right?" "She's fine," Jim assured him quickly. "Mrs. Richardson ran him off with a shotgun, but he was mighty upset when he left. Boss lady posted guards just in case he gets any more bright ideas." Blake's hands tightened on the reins until his knuckles whitened. "I should have been here," he said, his voice rough with anger at O'Malley, but mostly at himself for leaving Ruby vulnerable. "Couldn't have known," Jim said with a shrug. "Besides, Mrs. Richardson handled it just fine. You know how she is when someone crosses her." Blake nodded, though the reassurance did little to ease his self-recrimination. "Thanks for the warning, Jim. I'll check in with Mrs. Richardson." He rode directly to the main house, his mind racing. Vernon O'Malley had found the R faster than any of them had anticipated. The confrontation they had been preparing for had happened while Blake was away, unable to protect Ruby as he had promised. Elizabeth met him on the porch, her expression tense. "I was starting to worry," she said. "You're later than expected." "Got delayed in town," Blake explained, dismounting. "Jim told me what happened." "How is she?" "Shaken," Elizabeth admitted, but holding together remarkably well considering. She actually stood up to him, Blake, told him to his face that she wouldn't go back. Pride mingled with concern in Blake's chest. That took courage. It did, Elizabeth agreed. She's stronger than she knows, but O'Malley is dangerous, Blake, the way he looked at her. She shook her head. It wasn't just anger, it was something worse, like she was a possession he couldn't stand to lose, not because he values it, but because it's his. I know the type, Blake said grimly. Where is she now? In her room. She said she wanted to rest, but I suspect she's planning something. Elizabeth gave him a significant look. She has that same expression my grandmother used to get before she'd do something reckless and noble. Blake's stomach clenched. You think she might run? I think she might try, Elizabeth confirmed, to protect us, most likely. Ruby seems to have a hard time believing anyone would willingly risk themselves on her behalf. I'll talk to her, Blake decided. Convince her that running isn't the answer. Elizabeth's expression softened. She trusts you more than any of us, Blake. If anyone can get through to her, it's you. The implicit acknowledgement of the connection between him and Ruby wasn't lost on Blake. Elizabeth was famously observant. Little happened on her ranch that escaped her notice, including the growing feelings between her foreman and her guest. Blake handed Storm's reins to a waiting stable boy and entered the house, pausing only long enough to retrieve his packages from his saddlebags. He took the stairs 2 at a time, anxiety spurring him on. At Ruby's door he paused, taking a moment to compose himself before knocking gently. "Who is it?" Ruby's voice called from within, sounding strained. "Blake, may I come in?" There was a brief silence, then the sound of movement. The door opened to reveal Ruby, her face pale but composed, though Blake didn't miss the redness around her eyes that suggested recent tears. "You're back," she said, stepping aside to let him enter. "Did your errands go well?" The normalcy of the question struck Blake as absurd under the circumstances. "Jim told me what happened," he said, setting his packages on the small table by the window. "Why didn't you send someone to find me in town?" Ruby looked away. "There wasn't time, and you had important business." "Nothing more important than your safety," Blake insisted. He moved closer, gently touching her arm where a bruise was forming evidence of Vernon's grip. "He hurt you again." "It's nothing compared to what he's done before," Ruby said with a bitter attempt at a smile. "I barely felt it." The casual dismissal of her pain made Blake's chest ache. "Ruby," he said softly, "you don't have to pretend with me, not ever." Something in her expression cracked at his words. "I'm fine, Blake, truly." Elizabeth arrived before he could do any real damage. "This time," Blake said, "but Vernon O'Malley knows where you are now. He'll try again." Ruby nodded, moving to the window to look out at the darkening landscape, "Which is why I can't stay." There it was, the confirmation of Elizabeth's suspicion. Blake crossed the room to stand beside her. "Running isn't the answer, it's the only answer," Ruby replied, still not looking at him. "As long as I'm here, everyone at the RRR is in danger. You, Elizabeth, Mrs. Peterson, all of you have been so kind, and how do I repay you? By bringing Vernon's wrath down on your heads. We knew the risks when we took you in," Blake pointed out. "None of us regret it." "You should," Ruby said, her voice breaking slightly. "Vernon isn't just angry, Blake, he's humiliated. A man like that, he won't stop until he's punished everyone involved. He has money, connections. He could make trouble for the RRR in ways you haven't considered." "Let him try," Blake said with quiet certainty. "The RRR has weathered worse storms than one banker's son with wounded pride." Ruby finally turned to face him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "I can't let you take that risk, any of you. I've spent my whole life being told I'm not worth the trouble I cause. Maybe it's time I started believing it." The words hit Blake like a physical blow. Without thinking, he reached out, taking her hands in his. "Don't ever say that," he said fiercely. "Don't ever think it. You are worth every risk, Ruby O'Malley, every fight, every sacrifice." She stared at him, her expression a mixture of disbelief and desperate hope. "Why?" she whispered. "Why would you say that?" Blake took a deep breath, knowing he was crossing a line but unable to stop himself. "Because in 2 weeks, you've shown more courage and dignity than most people show in a lifetime. Because you deserve better than what life has handed you so far. Because—" He hesitated, then plunged ahead. "Because I care about you, Ruby, more than I should, perhaps, given the circumstances, but there it is." Ruby's hands trembled in his. "Blake," she began, but he shook his head, needing to finish now that he'd started. I know you're still legally married. I know any feelings between us are complicated at best. I'm not asking for promises or commitments. I'm just asking you to stay, to let me help you fight this battle." A tear slipped down Ruby's cheek, and Blake resisted the urge to brush it away. "I'm afraid," she admitted. "Not for myself, for you. Vernon isn't rational when it comes to his possessions, and that's all I am to him, property that's trying to escape." "You're not property," Blake said firmly. "You're a person, a remarkable person who deserves the chance to live without fear." He released one of her hands to reach into his vest pocket, pulling out Judge Ellsworth's letter. "I spoke with a judge in town today. He outlined some options for you, legal ways to end your marriage." Ruby took the letter with her free hand, her eyes widening. "You did this for me." "It's not as encouraging as I'd hoped," Blake warned her. "The law still favors husbands, especially men with money and influence, but it's not impossible." Ruby scanned the letter quickly, her expression shifting from hope to resignation. "Witnesses," she murmured. "That's the problem. No one saw what Vernon did behind closed doors. It was always my word against his." "Elizabeth saw the state you were in when you arrived," Blake pointed out. "So did I. So did Mrs. Peterson. And there must have been others in Dodge City who suspected the truth, even if they didn't speak up." "Perhaps," Ruby conceded. "But a legal battle would take time, and during that time Vernon would still have rights over me as his wife." "Which is why you stay here," Blake insisted, "where we can protect you until it's resolved." Ruby looked up at him, searching his face. "You really believe it's possible that I could be free of him legally?" "I do," Blake said with more confidence than he felt. "It won't be easy, but nothing worthwhile ever is." Ruby glanced back at the letter, then at Blake again. Something in her expression shifted, a tiny spark of hope taking root. "You said you care about me," she said quietly. Blake swallowed. I do. Even knowing all the complications, all the trouble I bring with me, even then," he confirmed. "Maybe because of them." "You've faced the worst life can throw at a person, Ruby, and you're still standing, still fighting. How could I not admire that? How could I not?" He trailed off, not quite ready to speak the word that hovered on his lips. Ruby's fingers tightened around his. "I care about you too," she whispered. "More than I thought was possible after everything. You make me feel safe, Blake, not because you're strong though you are, but because you see me, really see me." The admission hung between them, fragile and precious. Blake wanted nothing more than to pull her into his arms, to show her with actions what he struggled to express in words. But he held back, aware of the invisible barriers between them: her legal status, her recent trauma, the propriety that Elizabeth maintained at the R. "Will you stay?" he asked instead. "Let us help you fight this battle properly." Ruby took a deep breath, seeming to gather her courage. "Yes," she said finally, "I'll stay, but Blake, if Vernon tries again, if anyone gets hurt because of me, then we'll face that together," Blake interrupted gently. "That's what people do when they care about each other. They stand together against whatever comes." A small, genuine smile curved Ruby's lips, the first Blake had seen since returning from town. "Together," she repeated, as if testing the word. "Together," Blake confirmed. The moment stretched between them, charged with unspoken feelings. Finally, Blake reluctantly released her hand and stepped back, remembering the packages he'd brought. "I almost forgot," he said, moving to retrieve them from the table. "I found everything you asked for: thread, paper, envelopes." He hesitated, then added, "and a few other things I thought you might like." Ruby accepted the packages with a soft thank you, her fingers brushing his in the exchange. The simple contact sent warmth through Blake's chest. "I should let you rest," he said, though leaving was the last thing he wanted to do. "It's been a trying day." Ruby nodded, but as Blake turned to go, she called his name. When he looked back, she said simply, "I'm glad you're home safely." Home. The word struck Blake with unexpected force. The R had been his workplace for 5 years, his residence for nearly as long, but in that moment with Ruby standing in the soft lamplight, her eyes reflecting the same complicated emotions, he felt it truly felt like home. "So am I," he replied. "Good night, Ruby." "Good night, Blake." As he closed the door behind him, Blake felt both lighter and heavier than when he'd arrived, lighter because Ruby had agreed to stay, to fight. Heavier because the path ahead was uncertain and potentially dangerous. But one thing was clear. Whatever came next, they would face it together. And for now, that was enough. The next morning brought news that Vernon O'Malley had left Dodge City, supposedly on business for his father's bank. Ruby received the information with cautious relief when Elizabeth shared it at breakfast. Does that mean he's given up? She asked, though she knew better than to hope for such a simple resolution. Elizabeth shook her head. More likely he's regrouping. Perhaps consulting with lawyers about his options, or trying to gather support from officials who might enforce his rights as your husband. Blake, seated across from Ruby, frowned, or he could be trying to lull us into a false sense of security before trying again. Either way, Elizabeth said, his temporary absence gives us time to make our own preparations. She looked at Ruby. Blake tells me you're considering legal options. Ruby nodded. The judge's letter wasn't very encouraging, but it's better than nothing. Judges tend to be cautious in their written opinions, Elizabeth observed. It's possible Judge Ellsworth might be more supportive in person, especially with evidence of abuse. Evidence that's fading by the day, Ruby pointed out, touching her now healed lip. The bruises are gone, my ribs have mended. But our testimony hasn't changed, Blake said firmly. We saw what O'Malley did to you. And there may be others in Dodge City who suspected or witnessed his treatment of you. Ruby thought of the doctor who had set her broken wrist 6 months earlier, accepting Vernon's explanation of a fall down the stairs with obvious skepticism. Or the minister's wife who had given Ruby meaningful looks during Sunday services, as if trying to communicate silently. Perhaps, she conceded, but finding people willing to testify against a banker's son won't be easy. Leave that to me, Elizabeth said with a determination that made Ruby blink in surprise. I have my own connections in Dodge City, people who owe me favors or who have no love for the O'Malleys. Why would you go to such trouble for me? Ruby asked, genuinely puzzled. You barely know me. Elizabeth's expression softened. I know enough. And perhaps I see something of myself in you, what I might have become if Harold had been a different sort of man, or if I'd had less backbone when I needed it most. The conversation shifted to practical matters, the ranch accounts Ruby had been organizing, the cattle that needed to be moved to fresh grazing land, the supplies that were running low in the kitchen. But underneath the everyday discussions, Ruby could feel the current of something deeper, a sense of belonging, of being part of a household where her presence mattered and her contributions were valued. After breakfast, Ruby retreated to the office to continue her work on the accounts, but her mind kept returning to the conversation. Elizabeth's determination to help her, Blake's steady support, these were gifts she had never expected to receive in her life. The knowledge that she wasn't facing Vernon alone anymore gave her a strength she hadn't felt since before her marriage. Around midday, Blake appeared in the doorway of the office, hat in hand. Taking a group of hands to check on the north fence line, he told her. Probably won't be back until evening. Be careful, Ruby said, the words coming automatically. Blake smiled. Always am. He hesitated, then added, Mitch and Jim will be staying close to the house while I'm gone, just in case. Ruby nodded, appreciating both the precaution and the fact that he didn't try to hide it from her. Thank you. No need to thank me, Blake replied, though I wouldn't say no to another slice of your apple pie when I get back. The casual request, so normal, so domestic, made Ruby smile. I'll see what I can do. Blake's expression warmed at her smile. That's all I can ask. With a tip of his hat, he was gone, leaving Ruby staring at the empty doorway with a fluttering sensation in her chest that was becoming increasingly familiar whenever Blake was near. The afternoon passed quietly. Ruby finished reorganizing the cattle sales records and moved on to the expense ledgers, finding satisfaction in bringing order to the chaotic numbers. Around 4 o'clock, she decided to make good on her implied promise and headed to the kitchen to bake a pie for the evening meal. She was rolling out dough when Mrs. Peterson entered, arms laden with vegetables from the garden. Making another pie? The housekeeper asked approvingly. That last one disappeared faster than snow in August, Ruby smiled. Blake mentioned he might like a slice when he returns. Mrs. Peterson gave her a knowing look but refrained from commenting directly. Instead, she said, "That man works himself too hard, always has from the day Mrs. Richardson hired him. It's good to see someone taking an interest in his well-being." Ruby felt herself blush. "It's just a pie, Mrs. Peterson murmured skeptically, "and I'm the Queen of England." She set her basket on the table and began washing the vegetables. "You know, I've worked at the Triple R for 15 years. Saw Mrs. Richardson through her marriage, her husband's death, and the struggles after. Seen all sorts of people come and go." Ruby continued rolling the dough, unsure where this conversation was heading. "Blake Vance is one of the good ones," Mrs. Peterson continued. "Honest, hardworking, respectful, treats everyone the same, whether they're the lowest stable boy or the wealthiest cattle buyer from back east." "I've noticed," Ruby said quietly. "He doesn't let many people get close," the housekeeper observed. "Keeps to himself mostly, but he's different with you." Ruby's hands stilled on the rolling pin. "Mrs. Peterson, I'm not one to meddle," the older woman interrupted, though her expression suggested otherwise. "Just saying what I see. That man cares for you, and unless I'm much mistaken, you care for him too." Unable to deny it, Ruby simply said, "It's complicated." Mrs. Peterson snorted. "Life always is, dear, especially when it's worth living." She wiped her hands on her apron. "Now, are you making that pie with fresh apples or the dried ones in the pantry?" The abrupt change of subject was a relief. "Fresh, if we have them. There's a basket in the cold room. I'll fetch them for you." As Mrs. Peterson bustled away, Ruby reflected on her words. Was it so obvious to everyone that something had developed between her and Blake? And if so, what did that mean for her already precarious situation? She was still pondering these questions when the sound of approaching horses drew her attention to the window. A group of riders was coming up the drive too early to be Blake and his men returning from the fence line. Ruby wiped her hands on her apron, trying to see who the visitors were. As they drew closer, her blood froze in her veins. At the head of the group rode the tall, distinguished figure of Horace O'Malley, Vernon's father, and one of the most influential men in the county. Behind him rode Vernon himself, along with several men Ruby didn't recognize. One wore the badge of a law officer. They had come for her. And this time they had brought the law. Mrs. Peterson appeared at her side, taking in the situation with a glance. "Go to Elizabeth's study," she directed. "Tell her we have unwelcome visitors, then stay there until someone comes for you." Ruby hurried through the house, flour-dusted hands leaving white smudges on the door handles as she went. She found Elizabeth at her desk, reviewing paperwork. "Horace O'Malley is here," Ruby said without preamble, "with Vernon and a sheriff or deputy. They're coming up the drive now." Elizabeth rose immediately, her expression hardening. "I've been expecting this. Stay here, Ruby. Whatever you hear, don't come out until I call for you." "But no arguments," Elizabeth said firmly. "We have a plan, trust me." Before Ruby could respond, Elizabeth was gone, closing the study door behind her. Ruby moved to the window, which offered a partial view of the front yard. She watched as Elizabeth strode out to meet the arriving party, her posture radiating authority despite being outnumbered. Ruby couldn't hear the exchange clearly, but she could see Horace O'Malley dismount, followed by Vernon and the lawman. There appeared to be a heated discussion, with Horace gesturing emphatically and Elizabeth standing her ground. After several minutes, Elizabeth led the men toward the house. Ruby stepped back from the window, heart pounding. They were coming inside. Would Elizabeth's mysterious plan be enough to protect her from the law's insistence that a wife belonged with her husband? She heard them enter the house, heard Elizabeth's voice directing them to the parlor. Their footsteps and voices moved away from the study, giving Ruby a momentary sense of relief. But what now? Should she stay hidden as instructed, or should she flee? There was a window in the study that opened onto a side garden. She could climb out, make her way to the stables, take a horse. No, she had promised Blake she wouldn't run, and Elizabeth had asked her to trust her. After everything they had done for her, Ruby owed them that much at least, so she waited, pacing the study, straining to hear what was happening in the parlor. Occasionally, voices would rise enough for her to catch fragments. Vernon's angry tone, Horace's more measured but equally determined one, the deeper rumble of the lawman, and Elizabeth's steady responses. Time stretched endlessly. Ruby found herself staring at the small clock on Elizabeth's desk, watching the minutes tick by. 15 minutes, 20, 30. Finally, the study door opened. Elizabeth entered, her expression unreadable. Behind her came a man Ruby didn't recognize, middle-aged, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed spectacles and a dignified bearing that suggested education and authority. "Ruby," Elizabeth said, "this is Judge Ellsworth. He'd like to speak with you." Ruby stared in confusion. Judge Ellsworth, the same judge who had written the letter Blake had brought her. But why was he here now? "Madam," the judge greeted her with a small bow. "I understand you find yourself in a difficult situation." Ruby glanced uncertainly at Elizabeth, who nodded encouragingly. "Yes, Your Honor," she replied. "My husband, I've been informed of the general circumstances," Judge Ellsworth said gently, "and I've seen the statement from Dr. Miller regarding the injuries he treated over the past 6 months. What I need now is to hear directly from you about your wishes." "My wishes," Ruby repeated, bewildered. "Do you wish to return to your husband, Mrs. O'Malley, or do you wish to remain separate from him?" The question was so unexpected, so direct, that Ruby almost laughed from sheer surprise. No one had ever simply asked her what she wanted before. "I never want to see him again," she said honestly. "I want to be free of him." Judge Ellsworth nodded, as if he'd expected nothing else. "And you understand that pursuing a legal separation, possibly even a divorce, would be challenging? That it might expose you to public scrutiny and criticism?" "I understand," Ruby said firmly, "but I will not return to a home where I fear for my life daily." The judge studied her for a moment, then turned to Elizabeth. "I've heard enough. You may bring them in now." Elizabeth opened the study door and beckoned to someone in the hallway. To Ruby's shock, Horace and Vernon O'Malley entered, followed by the lawman and, most surprisingly of all, Blake Vance, who must have returned from his work on the fence line. Blake's eyes immediately sought Ruby's, silently asking if she was all right. She gave him a small nod, though her heart was racing at the sight of Vernon, whose expression was a mixture of rage and triumph. "As you can see, Judge," Horace O'Malley said, gesturing toward Ruby, "my daughter-in-law appears to be in good health. Whatever stories she's been telling about mistreatment are clearly exaggerated." "I haven't heard any stories," Judge Ellsworth replied mildly. "I've seen medical reports. And I've asked Mrs. O'Malley directly about her wishes." "Her wishes are irrelevant," Vernon snapped. "She's my wife. The law says she belongs with me." "The law also says a man has a duty to protect and care for his wife," the judge countered, "not to break her bones and split her flesh." Vernon's face flushed dark red. "Accidents, misunderstandings. Ruby has always been clumsy." "That's a lie," Ruby said, finding her voice at last. "Every injury I've suffered in the past 6 months came from your hand, Vernon. Everyone." "You see, Judge," Horace interjected smoothly, "this is the kind of hysteria we're dealing with. My son is a respected businessman, a pillar of the community. These accusations are absurd." "Are they?" Blake spoke up, his voice tight with controlled anger. "I saw her condition when we found her hiding under the porch of the Dodge City saloon. She was terrified, bruised, bleeding. No accident did that." "And who are you to interfere in a private matter between husband and wife?" Horace demanded. "A decent human being," Blake replied evenly. "Something your son might try becoming someday." Vernon lunged toward Blake, but the lawman caught his arm. "Easy now," the officer warned. "No need for more trouble." Judge Ellsworth cleared his throat. "I've heard and seen enough to make a preliminary ruling. Under the circumstances, I'm issuing a temporary order of protection. Mrs. Ruby O'Malley will remain under the guardianship of Mrs. Elizabeth Richardson until a formal hearing can be arranged to determine whether grounds exist for a legal separation." "What?" Vernon exploded. "You can't do that. She's my wife. I can and I have," the judge replied firmly. "Sheriff Andrews will enforce this order. Mr. O'Malley, you are to maintain a distance of at least 1 mile from your wife at all times until the hearing. Any violation will result in your arrest." Horace O'Malley's face had turned an alarming shade of purple. "This is outrageous." "I'll have your position for this, Ellsworth. You've overstepped your authority." I don't believe I have, the judge said calmly, but you're welcome to challenge my ruling through the proper legal channels. Until then, my order stands. Ruby could scarcely believe what she was hearing. A legal protection order against Vernon. It seemed impossible, like something from a dream. Vernon glared at her with such hatred that Ruby instinctively stepped closer to Blake, who moved slightly forward, putting himself between her and her husband. "This isn't over," Vernon hissed. "Not by a long shot. For today it is," Sheriff Andrews said firmly. "Come on, Mr. O'Malley, you and your father need to leave now." As the sheriff escorted the O'Malleys from the room, Ruby felt her legs weaken with relief. Blake was instantly at her side, offering his arm for support. "How?" she asked, looking between Blake, Elizabeth, and the judge. "How is this possible?" "Elizabeth sent for me this morning," Judge Ellsworth explained. She had already gathered statements from Dr. Miller and several others in Dodge City who had suspected your situation, but had been afraid to speak out against the O'Malleys. And I may have implied to Horace that I had discovered certain irregularities in his bank's dealings with the R, Elizabeth added with a small smile. "Irregularities that might interest the banking commission if we couldn't resolve this matter amicably," Blake chuckled. "Mrs. Richardson can be very persuasive when she wants to be." "It's only a temporary measure," the judge cautioned Ruby. "The hearing will be challenging. The O'Malleys won't give up easily, and the law still favors the husband in these situations." "But it's a start," Ruby said, her voice thick with emotion. "It's more than I ever thought possible." Judge Ellsworth nodded. "Rest tonight, Mrs. O'Malley. Tomorrow we'll begin preparing for the hearing. It won't be easy, but with the evidence we've gathered and the witnesses willing to speak, you have a fighting chance." After the judge departed, promising to return the next day with more detailed advice, Ruby found herself alone in the study with Blake and Elizabeth. The events of the afternoon seemed surreal, like something happening to someone else. "I don't know how to thank you both," she said, her voice catching. "What you've done, the risks you've taken, no thanks necessary," Elizabeth assured her. "I've waited years for an opportunity to put Horace O'Malley in his place. You gave me the perfect excuse." Blake's hand found Ruby's, his warm fingers lacing through hers. "What matters is that you're safe for now, and we'll keep you that way." Elizabeth glanced at their joined hands and smiled knowingly. "I'll leave you two to talk. There's supper to be seen to, and explanations to be given to the hands who have been worried about all the commotion." After she left, Blake turned to Ruby, his expression serious. "Are you really all right? Seeing Vernon again must have been difficult." "It was," Ruby admitted. "But having you here made it bearable." She squeezed his hand. "How did you know to come back from the fence line?" "I didn't go," Blake confessed. "Elizabeth and I suspected the O'Malleys might try something legal after their direct approach failed. We thought it better if I stayed close, just out of sight." "You lied to me," Ruby asked, hurt despite understanding the reasoning. "Omitted," Blake corrected gently. "To protect you from worry. I'm sorry if that was wrong." Ruby considered this, then nodded her acceptance. "I suppose I understand, but please don't do it again. I've had enough of men making decisions for me for my own good." "Fair enough," Blake agreed. "No more omissions. Partners in this fight, just as I promised." "Partners." The word sent warmth through Ruby's chest. "Judge Ellsworth seems to think we have a chance," she said cautiously. "Do you believe him?" "I do," Blake said firmly. "It won't be easy, but nothing worthwhile ever is." His thumb traced gentle circles on the back of her hand. "And regardless of the outcome, you won't face it alone." Ruby looked up at him, at the sincerity in his blue eyes, the strength in his weathered face, the kindness in his expression that Vernon had never shown even during their courtship. "Blake," she began hesitantly, "when this is over, if I'm free, what happens then?" He understood her meaning immediately. "That would be entirely up to you, Ruby. I won't presume to make plans for your future." "But if I wanted you to be part of those plans," she pressed, surprising herself with her boldness. "If I wanted to stay at the R, not just as Elizabeth's accountant, but as my wife," Blake finished for her, his voice dropping to a near whisper. Ruby nodded, unable to form the words. Blake's free hand came up to gently touch her cheek. Then I would be the happiest man in Kansas, he said simply. But that's a bridge we'll cross when we come to it. One battle at a time, Ruby. Let's win your freedom first. It was the right answer, the honorable answer, and it only made Ruby care for him more deeply. One battle at a time, she agreed. As the sun set outside the study window, casting long shadows across the room, Ruby allowed herself to imagine a future she had thought forever lost to her, a future with choices, with dignity, with the kind of love that lifted rather than crushed. It was still just a possibility, a hope rather than a certainty. Vernon and Horace O'Malley were powerful enemies who wouldn't surrender easily. The legal battle ahead would be difficult and potentially ugly. But for the first time since she had fled her husband's house with nothing but the clothes on her back and a desperate hope for escape, Ruby O'Malley believed that freedom might actually be within her grasp. And more than that, she believed she deserved it. 6 weeks later, Ruby stood before Judge Ellsworth in the Dodge City courthouse, her heart pounding but her spine straight. The courtroom was packed curious townspeople, triple R hands who had come to show support, and of course, the O'Malleys and their allies. The past weeks had been a whirlwind of preparation. Statements had been gathered, witnesses interviewed, legal precedents researched. Through it all, Ruby had remained at the Triple R, protected by the judge's order and the vigilance of Blake and the other hands. Vernon had tested the boundaries of the protection order, several times riding close to the Triple Articus borders, sending increasingly threatening letters, attempting to corner Ruby the one time she had ventured into town with Elizabeth to meet with their lawyer. Each violation had been documented and added to their case, building a picture of a man obsessed with control rather than concerned for his wife's well-being. Now, as the judge prepared to announce his ruling after 3 days of testimony, Ruby felt oddly calm. Whatever happened today, she had found her courage. She had spoken her truth in open court, facing Vernon's accusations and lies with a steadiness that had visibly impressed the judge. Blake sat directly behind her, a solid presence she had come to rely on. Elizabeth was beside him, regal in her best dress, her expression daring anyone to question her testimony about Ruby's condition when she arrived at the ranch. Having reviewed all evidence and testimony in this matter, Judge Ellsworth began, his voice carrying through the hushed courtroom, I find that sufficient grounds exist for the granting of a legal separation between Ruby Ann O'Malley and Vernon James O'Malley. A murmur ran through the crowd. Ruby hardly dared to breathe. Furthermore, the judge continued, given the evidence of persistent cruelty and the documented violations of this court's protection order, I am granting Mrs. O'Malley's petition for divorce on grounds of extreme cruelty. The murmur became a buzz of astonishment. Divorce was rare, especially when contested by the husband. Ruby felt Blake's hand on her shoulder, a gentle squeeze of support. Mr. O'Malley will return all property belonging to Mrs. O'Malley prior to their marriage, including items inherited from her father's estate. Mrs. O'Malley waives any claim to marital property or financial support, as requested in her petition. Vernon had risen to his feet, his face contorted with fury. This is an outrage. You can't sit down, Mr. O'Malley, Judge Ellsworth ordered sharply, unless you wish to add contempt of court to your troubles. Horace O'Malley pulled his son back into his seat, his own expression thunderous. The protection order remains in effect permanently, the judge concluded. Mr. O'Malley is to maintain a distance of at least 1 mile from his former wife at all times. Violation of this order will result in immediate arrest and imprisonment. He struck his gavel. This matter is concluded. Ruby sat motionless, unable to fully comprehend what had just happened. Free. She was free, legally, officially free from Vernon O'Malley. Blake helped her to her feet as the courtroom began to empty. Vernon stormed out with his father, pausing only to give Ruby a look of such hatred that it might have terrified her once. Now she met his gaze steadily until he turned away. It's over, Blake said softly as they followed Elizabeth toward the exit. You did it, Ruby. We did it, she corrected him. I couldn't have faced this alone. Outside the courthouse in the bright Kansas sunlight, Elizabeth embraced Ruby warmly. Congratulations, my dear. You've won a victory not just for yourself, but for every woman who has suffered as you have. Thank you for everything, Ruby said, returning the embrace. I don't know what I would have done without you. You would have found another way, Elizabeth said confidently. You're stronger than you know. She glanced between Ruby and Blake with a knowing smile. I'll wait for you at the hotel. I imagine you two have things to discuss. After Elizabeth departed, Blake took Ruby's hand and led her away from the courthouse steps to a quieter spot beneath a maple tree. His expression was a mixture of joy and uncertainty that made Ruby's heart flutter. You're a free woman now, he said, free to go wherever you want, do whatever you choose. Ruby nodded. Yes, I am. And what is it you choose, Ruby O'Malley? Blake asked, his voice low and serious. Ruby looked up at him, this man who had pulled her from beneath a porch and into a life she had never dared to hope for. This man who had stood between her and danger, who had believed in her right to freedom when the law and society said otherwise. I choose to stay, she said simply. At the Triple R, with Elizabeth and Mrs. Peterson, and with you, Blake Vance, if that offer still stands. Blake's face broke into a smile that transformed his features. It stands, he assured her. It will always stand. Then ask me properly, Ruby said, surprised by her own boldness. Blake didn't hesitate. In full view of anyone who cared to look, he went down on one knee before her, still holding her hand in his. Ruby O'Malley, will you do me the honor of becoming my wife? Not because the law says you belong to me, but because we belong with each other as partners, as equals, as two people who choose each other freely. Tears of joy blurred Ruby's vision. Yes, she whispered. Yes, I will. Blake rose and, with a gentleness that still amazed her, drew her into his arms. His kiss was tender, respectful, but with an underlying passion that promised a lifetime of love freely given and received. When they parted, Blake rested his forehead against hers. I love you, Ruby. I think I have since the moment I saw you under that porch, battered but unbroken. I love you too, Ruby replied, the words feeling both new and familiar on her tongue. You saved me, Blake. No, he corrected gently. You saved yourself, I just helped you find the way. And as they walked hand in hand toward their future, Ruby knew he was right. She had saved herself with help, with support, with love, but the courage had been hers all along, waiting for the chance to emerge. 2 years later, the Triple R ranch house was filled with the sounds of celebration, laughter, music, conversation flowing as freely as the punch Mrs. Peterson had prepared for the occasion. Ruby moved through the crowded parlor, accepting congratulations and well wishes from neighbors and ranch hands alike. Her hand rested lightly on her rounded belly, where the newest Vance was making his or her presence known with enthusiastic kicks. Blake followed her gaze and smiled, crossing the room to join her. Tired? He asked softly, his hand covering hers protectively over their unborn child. You've been on your feet for hours. Ruby leaned into his solid warmth. A little, but happy, so very happy. Blake pressed a kiss to her temple. Why don't you sit for a while? The party will continue without you playing hostess every minute. She allowed him to lead her to a comfortable chair near the window, where she could watch the gathering while giving her swollen feet a rest. Elizabeth's second anniversary gift to them, full partnership in the Triple R, had been announced earlier that evening to cheers from the hands who had come to respect Blake and Ruby as much as they did Elizabeth herself. Blake Vance, a familiar voice called from across the room. Is it true you're taking on breeding horses as well as cattle now? Blake excused himself to answer the question from a neighboring rancher, squeezing Ruby's hand before he left. She watched him go with a smile, still sometimes amazed at the turn her life had taken. After their wedding, a simple ceremony at the Triple R with Elizabeth. As witness, Ruby had thrown herself into ranch life with enthusiasm. Her work with the accounts had expanded to include negotiations with cattle buyers, management of the household budget, and eventually, full partnership in all Triple R business. Blake had been beside her every step of the way, encouraging her independence while offering support when needed. Their marriage was a true partnership, built on respect, trust, and a love that deepened with each passing day. The sound of running feet drew Ruby's attention to the doorway, where a small figure appeared, a little girl of about 18 months with Blake's blue eyes and Ruby's auburn hair. "Mama." Sarah Vance called, toddling toward Ruby with outstretched arms, pursued by a slightly frazzled-looking Mrs. Peterson. "Sorry," the housekeeper apologized. She was supposed to be napping, but she heard the music and insisted on joining the party. Ruby laughed, lifting her daughter onto her lap despite her advanced pregnancy. "It's all right. She should be part of the celebration too." Sarah snuggled against Ruby, eyeing the gathered guests with curious eyes that missed nothing. Even at her young age, she showed signs of both her parents' determination and intelligence. "Little escape artist, just like her mother," Blake observed, returning to them with 2 glasses of punch. He handed one to Ruby and ruffled Sarah's hair affectionately. "I prefer to think of it as resourcefulness," Ruby replied with a grin. "A quality that served me well, as I recall," Blake's expression softened. "That it did." The party continued around them, but in that moment, Ruby felt as though they were in their own private world, she and Blake and Sarah, and the new little one who would join their family in a few months' time. A family built on choice, on freedom, on love freely given. Vernon O'Malley had left Dodge City shortly after the divorce was granted, unable to face the humiliation of his public defeat. Rumor had it he had moved east, where his father's connections had secured him a position in a New York bank. Ruby rarely thought of him now, and when she did, it was with pity rather than fear. Elizabeth joined them, elegant as always even in her advancing years. "You two should be mingling with your guests," she chided gently. "This is your celebration, after all." "We will," Blake promised. "Just taking a moment to appreciate what matters most." Elizabeth's expression softened as she looked at the family tableau before her. "I understand completely." She reached for Sarah, who went to her willingly. "Let me take this little one for a while. You two enjoy your evening." As Elizabeth departed with Sarah perched happily on her hip, Blake held out his hand to Ruby. "May I have this dance, Mrs. Vance?" Ruby placed her hand in his, allowing him to help her to her feet. "I'm hardly graceful these days," she warned, glancing down at her pregnant figure. "You're beautiful," Blake said with such conviction that Ruby blushed like a girl. "You've always been beautiful to me, from the first moment I saw you, even covered in dirt, hiding under a porch," she teased. "Especially then," he replied seriously. "Because even then, even at your lowest point, I could see your strength, your courage." As Blake led her in a slow, careful dance, mindful of her condition, Ruby reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. From terror to safety, from captivity to freedom, from isolation to community. "What are you thinking?" Blake asked, noticing her thoughtful expression. Ruby smiled up at him, her heart full to bursting with love for this man who had shown her what real partnership meant. "I'm thinking about hiding places," she said, "and how sometimes when you're hiding from something terrible, you end up finding something wonderful instead." Blake's arms tightened around her, his eyes full of the same love she felt. "I'm glad I found you, Ruby Vance." "And I'm glad you had the courage to pull me out," she replied softly. "Into the light, into life, into love." Around them, the celebration continued, friends and neighbors raising glasses to their success, to their partnership in the Triple R, to the future they were building together. But in that moment of quiet connection amid the noise and activity, Ruby and Blake were aware only of each other, and the precious bond they had forged, a bond that had begun when a frightened woman hiding under a porch had found the courage to take a stranger's outstretched hand and step into a new beginning. It was a beginning that had led to this perfect moment, and to all the moments yet to come in a life built on mutual respect, shared dreams, and a love that had been worth every risk, every struggle, and every leap of faith along the way.